Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I am finally here with my favorite novels of 2020. I know this is so late. Yeah, like if you guys are still watching these, thank you. So these are going to be all of my favorite novels that I read in the year 2020. I have already done my favorite nonfiction video, and I will also be doing my favorite non-novel books. So like poetry, plays, picture books, rereads, that kind of thing. So keep an eye out for that if you're still watching these again. But today I'm going to talk about like favorite books or favorite specifically novels that I read last year. I have 12 books to talk about, and I have ranked them, I think, in order of like least to most favorite, but when you're talking about your favorite books of the year, like these are all fantastic, so it's kind of a pointless exercise in a way, but I did try, and some of these I agonized over, and I'm still not sure about the order. And like I always say with my favorites videos, the order could change on any given day or any given mood. Just as a case in point, when I recently had to come up with two favorite books on the spot, one of the ones I picked was Blanca y Roja by Anna Marie McLemore, which was one of my favorite books the year that I read it, but it was not #1 on the list, so just proves what I'm saying. Okay, so starting with number 12, and this is the only book on this list that I did not give 5 stars to, but I still love it, and the more I think about it, the more I love it, so even though I have some issues with it, it's still on this list. And that is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is a not exactly retelling of Pride and Prejudice, it's an inspired story that takes place after the events of that novel, and we are following Mary Bennett as our main character. So we start the book with Mary. We talk a little bit about Mary's childhood, not too much time is spent on that, but we see how she's grown up being constantly compared to her sisters, and especially how beautiful her sisters are. We see how people look down on her accomplishments, like she works so hard to try and make up for her lack of beauty, and people don't even appreciate that. It's really heartbreaking to see just those snippets of what Mary's life was like, but I think it's so important. And one of the criticisms I was hearing about this book, and one of the things that almost made me not pick it up, is people were saying that the first like half of the book, or maybe third, is like very dull, and it's like essentially just retelling Pride and Prejudice from Mary's perspective. And I did not feel like that at all. Like, I really liked the like snippets we got of Pride and Prejudice. I think that it gave us a perspective on Mary. Like, there were scenes that we didn't know what Mary was doing during them, so it was cool to see her perspective. It wasn't like we were just retelling the same exact thing. We also get some scenes and interactions with Mary that we don't get from the original novel, so I actually really like that backstory part. And then partway through the book, she ends up going to stay with the Gardiners in London, and like just this book is about Mary like learning to love herself and learning that she is enough as she is, and like learning to branch out in that like the kinds of books that she reads without downplaying the importance of the ones that she already does. There's also a love interest who is one of my favorite love interests I have ever read. He has made the coveted book boyfriend's shelf on Goodreads, which very rarely happens. And he's just, I love him so much. Like, he's so smart and clever, and he's also super into poetry, and the way that he and Mary bond over poetry and over literature in general, and the way that they help each other see the other person's, like, their point of view without downplaying the importance of the thing that the other person likes. That was very confusingly explained, but hopefully you get it. Like, I just love their interactions. I love Mary's relationship and interactions with the Gardiners, and the way that they really help her start to see that she is worthy of love, and it's just like such a lovely book. This is so satisfying to read. I really loved Mary's character growth. I really enjoyed the writing of this book. I think that it has a lot of fantastic things to say about beauty standards and the way that those define women especially, and especially at this time. And I just, yeah, I really love this book. The only things that I was like not as much a fan of is there's like a misunderstanding that I saw coming and I knew was going to be frustrating, but it like took even longer to resolve than I think it should have, so that was annoying. And I also would have liked to see a little more groveling from a particular character. Like, I understand why the author wrote the scene the way she did, but I would have liked to see a little more from somebody. But yeah, I highly recommend this if you are at all interested in this kind of retelling, but even if you're not, like even if you're just looking for a historical fiction book that has some of these ideas and like character elements, I would highly recommend this one. So yes, loved this one. I can already tell this is going to be a really long video because I just love all these books. Next on my list is The Boy in the Black Suit by Jason Reynolds. This is a contemporary novel that I actually have a full spoiler-free review on, so I will link that down below. And we follow our main character, Matt, and his mother has recently passed away, and he's still having a really hard time grieving her. His father is also really not doing well or handling it in a very healthy way. And because of a series of circumstances, Matt ends up getting a job at the local funeral home. which is why it's called The Boy in the Black Suit. He ends up wearing a black suit to school every day because he goes to work right after school. And Matt finds that through attending other people's funerals and being a witness to other people's grief, he really starts to process his own. And it's a very cathartic experience for him. We also see him get to know Mr. Ray, the owner of the funeral home, and we see him kind of become a sort of like father figure in his life. I really, really loved that relationship. I think all of the characters and relationships were done so well in this book. Matt's best friend is also great. I really liked the two of their friendship. And he also meets a girl that he gets a crush on, and they end up spending a lot of time together too and getting to know each other. And I'm just so impressed with the way that even though you meet this female character as like Matt's potential love interest, she doesn't feel like she only exists to be his love interest. Like, she's a fully developed character, and I really, really loved her. And I just think this book does such a great job of talking about grief and balancing that with the lighter moments in this book. It's a very quick read, but it's just like so engaging. I loved these characters so much. I love Jason Reynolds as a writer. I love everything he does. His characterization is always fantastic. His writing is always great. He's just so excellent at talking about these serious issues and balancing them with moments of humor and hope and lightness. And yeah, absolutely loved this. I know that Long Way Down is his most popular book, which is also fantastic, but I think his other novels definitely deserve attention as well. Oh, and shout out to my friend Margaret from The Word Nerd, because she was actually the one who talked about that book and who got me interested in it, and obviously I loved it. Next on my list is A Mixture of Mischief. This is the third book in the Love, Sugar, Magic series by Anna Meriano, and I actually buddy read this with my friend Priscilla from Bookie Charm, and this, like, I love this series. I have been talking about how I love this series. Our main character is Leonora, and in the first novel, she finds out that her family have baking magic, and she decides, of course, that she doesn't want to wait around until she's old enough to learn it. She wants to learn it right now. So she starts doing spells by herself, and predictably that goes very much awry. And then in this third book, we are following, there's like a conflict involving a new bakery in town. So it's possibly threatening the success of their family bakery, but there's like some other conflict going on as well. And I just loved this book. This might be my favorite in the series, but I'm not sure. I always love the baking magic. I love Leo as a main character, and I love, love, love the family relationships in these books. And I am so impressed with the way that, like, we see Leo throughout the series learning that she can lean on the people she loves and that they will be there for her, and that she doesn't have to struggle through hard times by herself. And in this book, we see her parents kind of realizing the same thing. Like, they're trying to keep things from their kids because they want to, like, not worry them, and they realize that families, like, loved ones need to stick together. And sometimes that means like spreading that burden out a little bit so that you can all work together on a solution. So I really loved that. I also think this book touches on some really important ideas like cultural appropriation and the way that we talk about women's abilities and like women in history, and how we look down on skills traditionally associated with women. It touches on those with such a light hand, but in such a thoughtful way. And yeah, like, just the series is just such a warm, cozy hug. Next, I have The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a female-female historical romance, and we are following our two main characters, Catherine and Lucy. And Lucy is really brilliant at astronomy, and actually before her father's death, she had been doing the majority of the calculations for him, but nobody knew that she was helping him. So of course her father got credit for that work, but she's really, really good at it. And then Catherine is recently widowed, and I think she was like, her husband or her were like sponsoring a project that Lucy and her father were working on. The project is a translation of a very important astronomical text, and Lucy's one of the only people who can do that. And so she begs Catherine to let her continue the work, and so she ends up staying at Catherine's house, and they gradually start to spend more time together and develop feelings for each other. And I just love this book so much. Like, I really, really loved the developing romance between the two of them. I loved both characters, and I especially really loved the way Catherine's storyline was explored, because Catherine is a brilliant embroiderer. Like, she creates these incredible pieces of art with her needlework, but she doesn't think that is art. She doesn't think it has value at all because that's women's work, you know? Like, that's not something that is considered important. And to see her realize throughout the book that she is talented and she is, like, her work is important was just so, so beautiful. And I think that really beautifully mirrors Lucy's like kind of realizations or her skill set too, because obviously women in STEM, especially in this time period, was not popular. And so Lucy has always known that she's had to fight for recognition, and she has to fight to prove that she deserves to do this. And then her journey is about realizing that she follows in the footsteps of other women before her, and that Like there's this really, really beautiful scene that got me like very choked up actually when she realizes that she stands on the shoulders of giants, and that these women before her have kind of paved the way, and that just because other women have done similar things, it does not take it away from how important it is that Lucy does these things. So I really loved their individual journeys, and I also really loved their development of their romance together. And seeing Catherine realize that she was in a really miserable marriage is hard to read sometimes, but it's so cathartic when she realizes that she deserves better than that. I also really appreciated the way that the book dealt with the power imbalance between them, because Catherine is, I think she's like a lady, she's like of a higher class, and she's also a little bit older than Lucy. And I really appreciate the way the book like talked about that a little bit. I don't tend to like age gaps or kind of power gaps like that in romances, but I think this book did it very thoughtfully, and it made them feel like the way they engage with those things, it put them on an equal playing field, which I really appreciated. I obviously love the themes of this book about women's work and women in STEM, and yeah, like I also think this book does a great job of being a really joyful queer story. Like it does engage with some of the difficult things that LGBT plus people had to go through in this time period specifically, so it doesn't brush that under the rug, but primarily this is a story of love and joy and hope, and I just loved that. Yeah, this was just absolutely lovely. Next we have one of my, I think, biggest surprises of the year, and that is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. So I have been very vocal about my strong dislike of the Bear and the Nightingale series. I read the first 2 books in that series and just did not like them. So I was kind of hesitant about this one, but I wanted to try it because it's a very different premise, but I was still nervous. But thankfully I loved this. So we are following our main character Ollie, and her mother has recently passed away. I'm realizing there are a few books on this list like that, and she's still really struggling with that. And one day she finds a woman at a river who's about to throw a book into the river, and Ollie loves to read, and she's like, you can't do that. So she rescues the book from this woman, and she reads the book, and it's this really, really kind of creepy story. And then she ends up going on a field trip to a large farm in their area for school, and things start happening that mirror what happened in the book. So Ollie's getting really creeped out by this, and it turns into a really scary game of hide and seek basically with her and a couple of other students, and they're trying to keep themselves safe and figure out what's going on and escape from these creatures. And I just really loved this. This was a buddy read with my friend Katie from A Sea of Tomes, and we both really enjoyed this. The atmosphere is so well done. Like the creepiness, and like this is like middle grade creepiness, middle grade horror, and I just think it was impeccably done. Like the building tension I think was fantastic. Like the antagonists of this book I think were just very effective, and I really loved Ollie as a main character. And I am so happy that one of the big issues I had with Bear and the Nightingale is like the not like other girls that just like smacks you upside the face throughout both books I read. And like I really didn't like that, and that was one of the things I was worried would carry through into Catherine Arden's other books, and that didn't happen here. Like one of the characters that is with Ollie in this book is kind of a really great refutation of that idea. I just really loved the friendship that develops. I just really loved like the story of this one too, and the things that it says about grief. I just really loved this, and I'm so happy that I gave Catherine Arden another chance. Next on my list is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This was an interesting experience. So this was actually another buddy read with Nina, and I was a little hesitant about this one too, because I had read a couple of things from Charles Dickens that I really had not enjoyed, but I knew like the basic story of this one. I saw the movie version a long time ago, and I was like, I'm more interested in the premise of this than some of his other books, so you know, this kind of, we'll see if the third time's a charm for Charles Dickens. And it was like, this was such an emotional book. I've mentioned this book a few times recently when I had to talk about books that made me emotional, because like I cried so hard despite like knowing the story, and as I've said, it was like ugly crying, but I just loved this. I was gonna say I love these characters. Primarily who I love is Sydney Carton, who like I would argue is kind of like the secret protagonist of this book, because even though like the main story is about Charles Darnay and Lucy and like their love for each other and everything, Sydney is the one who gets the most significant character development, and he's the one whose story just like works its way into your heart. Like I just loved him. I think he also made my book boyfriend's shelf, which is like a little weird, but It's true. I just like really love him as a character, and his character development was so beautiful to see. And this is just like, I also really like some of the side characters. I don't mean it to sound like Sydney's the only good character. I definitely think he was better developed than Charles and Lucy, but it almost didn't bother me because like I cared about them because Sydney cared about them, so that was enough. But some of the side characters are really well developed as well, and I also ended up really liking the writing, which it took me a long time to adjust to. And I read a lot of classics, so I don't think that was it. I think that for whatever reason, Charles Dickens' writing style is something that it takes me longer to unravel than other classic writers, or like it's harder for me to follow, because the first couple chapters I was not really feeling it. But then I ended up really, really getting into this story, really warming up to his writing. And I also think that he did a pretty good job of like writing about the French Revolution in a compassionate way. Like I definitely think he's like a little more sympathetic to the aristocracy than maybe some writers would have been, but overall I think he did a fairly good job showing that the aristocrats were doing despicable things to the common people, and that had to be stopped. And then also showing like, okay, but when you get to the point of executing children, like I think it's time to kind of reevaluate I don't know, like your methods or what your goals are. So I think he balanced those things pretty well. And yeah, this is one of those books where it's not a 5 stars because I have no issues with it. It's a 5 stars because the aspects that I love were so effective and meant so much that it kind of overshadows those. Because like I said, some characters weren't as well developed. Some of the details or like the scenery that we got was just like way more than we needed. Some of the side characters, the way that their humor was done really bothered me. There's one in particular who I think we're supposed to find it really funny that he like mistreats his wife, which I did not find funny. So there's things like that I'm not a fan of, but overall this book just had a really big impact on me, and I'm really glad I read it, and it is one of my favorites of the year. Next on my list is yet another buddy read, and that is Beartown by Frederick Backman. This was a buddy read with my friend Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe. As always, everyone I mentioned will be linked down below. And the translator is, I think, Neil Smith. Yes. This is a very popular, very well-known book, and I personally feel like it lived up to all the hype for me. And this one, when I did my spoiler-free review, because I also have one for this book, I did talk about the premise in more detail. When I did my wrap-up, I did not. I think for this video, I'm gonna have to talk about what this book is about, because even though some people treat it like a spoiler, because the synopsis doesn't tell you what it's about, I think it's really important to know that. And I also think just like the way that the synopsis was written and the like non-spoilery things I had heard people say about this book, I was like 95% sure I knew what it was about going in anyway. So I don't think that detracted from my experience with this book at all. So anyway, if you don't want to hear what this book is about at all, then skip this part, but I'm gonna talk about it because I think so much of what makes this book incredibly effective is directly tied to that. So this book is set in a small town in Sweden, and this year they have a really excellent hockey team, and this is kind of going to be their big ticket to like putting them on the map, getting more businesses there, because the town is really like, you know, kind of going under basically. And all the townspeople are really hopeful that if they have a really stellar hockey season, they're going to get like sponsorships and like businesses are going to come here, and it's going to really turn things around for them. So people in this town are really, really invested in this hockey team. And then somebody on the team rapes a girl in the town, and the rest of the book is about the fallout from that. It's about the way that people take sides. It's about not just rape, but rape culture. And this is just obviously a very difficult book to read at times, but I think it is so compassionate and so thoughtful, and it will make you very, very angry at times, but I think it is a really necessary book. And I'm not going to reveal like specific character things because some of that you don't find out until later, but yeah, I don't even really know how to talk about this book, so I'll just kind of like take it point by point. But I thought the writing was fantastic. This book was also incredibly compelling to read. Like you felt like you had to know what was going to happen. I really liked the characters that you were supposed to like. Obviously some of the people in this book are just despicable people, but the ones who are not are, they're just like such wonderful characters. And something I really appreciated about this book is that even though a lot of people do not believe the victim and just treat her in terrible ways, she does have a support system. She has her best friend and she has her family, and they never for a second doubt her. And I think that is so important to show. There have been studies and studies and studies that show that the first person that a victim tells, their reaction is incredibly important to their mental health and their recovery. And I just really appreciate that this book showed some people being there for her, even if a lot of other people weren't. I think that thematically this book is so well done and so important. I think it talks about, it does such a brilliant job of showing that rape and rape culture do not come out of nothing, that it happens because of the way that we commodify women's bodies, the way that boys think they are owed attention or affection or sex, the way that we talk about what victims were wearing, the way that things that start out as jokes, like in locker rooms or at parties, that are not actually funny, the way that those jokes contribute to this feeling of entitlement and of being owed somebody's body. And it's just, yeah, I don't feel like I'm talking very coherently about this book because it is such an intensely emotional experience. But if you can handle the subject material, I think that this is fantastic. I think that this is, again, a book that really, really lived up to the hype for me. I just think it is really, really excellent. Next on my list is Alatsue by Darcy Littlebadger, illustrations by Rowena Kai. And in this book we follow our main character Alatsue, or Ellie. She's Lipan Apache, and that this book is also own voices for that, and she is also asexual, which this book is own voices for that representation as well. And this is set in kind of an alternate United States. It's like a contemporary paranormal fantasy, and that it's set again in kind of like a contemporary United States setting, except that there are spirits and like magical creatures, and everybody like knows about them. And our main character Ellie, she has the ability to raise ghosts. She also has a ghost dog companion throughout the book, so that's a really fun element too. And the book starts with one of Ellie's cousins dying in mysterious circumstances, and he comes to Ellie in a dream and says that he was murdered, and he tells her who killed him. And then the rest of the book is Ellie and her family and a couple of her friends trying to figure out why this person killed her cousin and trying to bring him to justice. And I just really, really loved this book. I really liked Ellie as a main character. I really enjoyed the character dynamics with her and her best friend and with her family. And something I love about this book is that the conflict does not come from Ellie's family or friends not believing her. Like, that's something that I find very frustrating in books, is when we waste a lot of time, like characters waste a lot of time like not believing somebody when they could be actually working to solve the problem. So I love that that didn't happen here. And I also found it so interesting that this is like a murder mystery, but you know who the murderer is already, and the point, or like the goal, is to prove that this person did it and to figure out why they did it and to bring them to justice. So I really liked that take on it. And I also really liked the writing. I found it very smooth and quick to read, and very engaging, and just like the perfect amount of, I think, character work and plot and like setting detail and everything. I know some people, like I've been seeing some reviews say that like this was written like a middle grade novel, and that kind of threw some people off, or they didn't like that. Personally, I don't feel like that's a super helpful description. Like I don't think you can have something that's written like a middle grade, because there's so much variety in how different age ranges are written. So like I get what people are saying, but just because something is written in a more like spare or concentrated writing style, that doesn't mean it's like for children. But anyway, I really loved the writing, and that's not like, I know people weren't saying that that like makes this book bad, but I just wanted to mention that that is a concern some reviewers have had, that didn't bother me at all. This book also deals with ideas like privilege and the way that people of color are exploited, like the way that white people exploit people of color in various ways. And it does those things, I think, very effectively, while also being a story that doesn't feel too heavy somehow. And this is another book that I just found an incredibly compelling read. Like I wanted to figure out this mystery. I wanted to see what was happening, and the build and the unfolding as you get little pieces of this puzzle, like the dawning horror that you feel as you realize what's going on, I think is just done so, so well. I also really love like the way that Ellie's background, like her identity, is something that gives her strength in a lot of different ways. Like there's this really great scene where because of her and her mother's background, like they're able to fight somebody, like they're able to like get rid of a bad guy because of who they are, and the way that scene was done is just so satisfying and so well written. I didn't mention, but like this is a really cool mashup of like different magical creatures and paranormal creatures. Like there are fairy rings and some like fairy people that are talked about. There are vampires. There's obviously like Ellie's ancestral powers. Yeah, I just really, really love this book. I feel like I keep getting to the end of these entries and like not knowing how to sum it up, but obviously I loved this book. Next on my list, and we're getting into just like the top few books here, although as I've said, like all of these are fantastic, so even like putting them in order is somewhat meaningless, but we are getting to the top few here. And next I have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a Gothic horror novel set in Mexico in the 1950s, and we follow our main character Noemi, and she gets a letter from her cousin who has recently gotten married. And this letter, in this letter, her cousin is asking her for help, saying that she thinks her husband is poisoning her and that she needs to come and help her. The letter that she gets is, "He is trying to poison me. You must come for me, Noemi. You have to save me." And Noemi doesn't really know how to take this letter, but just in case, she decides to go and visit her cousin at this really old, creepy mansion that she lives at now. And she starts finding out some secrets about this family that her cousin has married into. And yeah, things get very creepy from there. This is a book that I feel like got a lot of hype last year, and now the pendulum is kind of swinging back the other way, where I feel like now people are like, some people are picking it up and they're like, this was overhyped. I didn't think it was that great. So I'm a little worried that I am like adding to the hype by gushing about this book too. But this is truly one of my favorite books of the year, so like I have to talk about it. And I also did a reasons to read video on this book, so I'll link that down below too. Again, you know, this is what we do, like we risk overhyping things, but we have to talk about the books we love. So anyway, I just loved so many things about this. I do not read a lot of horror. I don't like horror usually, but I think the way that this book did it was like, I really thought this was an excellent book. And I think one of the reasons that I was okay reading this, even though it does, in my opinion, get very scary at some points, is because the horror is used for a purpose. It is used to discuss issues like eugenics and racism and colorism and colonization, and because these horror aspects are used for commentary, it didn't feel gratuitous or like it was there just for shock value, so I really appreciated that. I loved Noemi as a main character. I love her so much. She's unapologetically feminine, and I really love that she does not have to like grow out of that in order to be a competent main character. And in fact, a lot of the reasons that Noemi is able to like make progress on solving this mystery is because she is good at these very like feminine associated things like social graces, and you know, she's very charming and she knows how to work a beautiful dress, and I just really love her. She's so strong and brave and competent and very compassionate as well, and she is definitely out of her depth at some points in this book, but it doesn't ever feel like she's like making dumb choices just to advance the story. I also really liked some of the side characters. I think the characterization in general was just really well done. I also know some people did not find the horror scary. I personally did. I always like the way that Moreno Garcia writes. Yeah, I'm just like gushing. I loved this book. Again, I know it is not everybody's cup of tea, but I truly just think this is a fantastic book, and it was definitely one of my favorites that I read last year. Okay, we are down to the top three. My top three favorite books that I read last year. Number 3 on this list is The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Inheritance trilogy, and this was my first N.K. Jemisin book, and this was all it took to get me fully on the N.K. Jemisin bandwagon. This was incredible. So we are following our main character Yena, and I think her mother has also died somewhat recently. Yes. Several of the books on this list have that happen. And when this happens, she gets summoned to her mother's old kingdom. So she gets there, and basically she's told, like, you have to compete in order to get the throne, and if you lose, you die. And Yena doesn't want to do this. She's like, no, I did not sign up for this. I don't want to compete. And they're like, well, you have to. So Yena gets thrust into this world of politics and backstabbing that she was not prepared for. And also in this world, there are these gods that have been basically enslaved by some humans, and so that is also a conflict. Some of them are in the palace, so that is part of the plot as well. And this story is really about Yena just trying to survive. Like, she basically has to try and compete for this throne, because if she doesn't, she'll die. And she's very out of her depth, but she does seem to have some allies in the form of some of these gods, although can she actually trust them? That's another conflict as well. And I just really love this. I love Yena as a protagonist. She is such a fantastic main character. I'm realizing a trend with some of my favorite characters is like she's just so competent, and even though she's in a situation that she's at a huge disadvantage, she's not making stupid mistakes. Like she's doing the best she can, and she's like doing her best basically. And I always understand why she makes the decisions she makes, even if they're maybe not the best. And I also really admired her unshakable moral compass, where like even if she's not, like even if she sometimes has to reevaluate how she wants to pursue her goals and her morals, she has this core of strength, which is like being a decent person, and I just really admire that. I also thought the character dynamics were so interesting in this book. I loved the political intrigue and how that is kind of mixed with almost like a mystery subplot, because you are gradually finding out more and more about this world and these enslaved god characters, and how that relates to these different kingdoms, and like Yena is starting to learn more about the world around her, and like she's trying to figure out who she can trust, and it's such an engaging book. And I was a little worried, like I had heard that some of N.K. Jemisin's books, they can feel kind of dense, so I was wondering, I was like, maybe this is going to take me a while to get through, but I read it in like basically I think 24 hours or a little over that. Again, I couldn't put this book down. It's another one I found extremely compelling. I also love N.K. Jemisin's writing. It's like a very like smooth reading experience, and I just think she does an excellent job with characters and setting, and yeah, again, just fully on board the N.K. Jemisin train. I also found like the story developments of this book to be just very surprising in ways that are very satisfying. Like even if some parts of it I didn't see coming, it wasn't like, oh, well, of course I didn't guess it, because like that makes no sense. Like basically the plot developments, even the ones that were very surprising, felt justified and just, yeah, very satisfying. Fantastic book. Loved it. Number 2 on my list is kind of a sleeper favorite, I guess, in the sense that like I knew that this was one of my favorite books of the year, and I knew that I loved it, and I've talked about it several times, but it wasn't until I was putting my list in order that I was like, yeah, this is like in my top 3. I just was blown away by this book, and that is The Magnolia Sword, A Ballad of Mulan by Sherry Thomas. This is an Own Voices retelling of the story of Mulan, and it's based on the wuxia genre, which is a martial arts kind of fantasy genre, although it reads more like historical fiction, except for like supernaturally talented swordsmen. That's kind of one of the things that defines that genre. So this is, I think, a hard book to market, which is part of why it is so underhyped, so tragically underhyped, but I really loved this. I also have a spoiler-free review of this book, so I will link that down below. But I just adored this story, and I was not sure I was going to, because the first chapter is very different from the rest of the book, and I see why it's there, and I think it's a good way to start the book, but it definitely gave me different expectations of the kind of book this was going to be, or like certain elements of the book that I didn't think I would maybe like as much, but I ended up loving. So our main character is of course Mulan, and for generations now, her family has been in kind of a vendetta with another family, where every generation somebody from each family, the two of them meet in a battle, in a sword battle. This has been happening for a few generations at this point, and before Mulan gets the chance to prove herself, because she's been training for this her whole life, her father gets conscripted into the army, and Mulan's father is not able to go, and neither is her brother. He's very young, so Mulan dresses up as a man in order to take her father's place in the army. And then when she gets there, she ends up in like the kind of elite team along with the prince, and even though they don't get along at first, they end up working together and realizing that they and a couple of their friends and fellow soldiers may be the only people who can help save their kingdom. And I guess that's all I should really say about the summary. So 2 things about this book that I think make it just very astonishing that this is a favorite for me, is that 1, a lot of this book is spent on a journey, and we know I hate journey books. And 2, a lot of this is like military focused, which is another thing I don't tend to find very interesting. But I loved this book. Like I found the politics and even the way that interacted with the like military politics to still be very interesting. Like I never was bored in this book. It's definitely a character focused story, and I guess in some places it could feel maybe slow because of that reason, but I didn't feel like it was. I was never bored because I just loved these characters so much. And speaking of which, I love Mulan so much. I just really loved how, again, she's a very competent female character, and she does have weaknesses. Like, she realizes that, yes, she may be an incredible swordswoman, after her training and like in duels and things like that, but that's very different from being able to fight in battle. And so we see her struggle with that, and she doesn't succeed immediately, and she has to work to get better. But she's still so intelligent and so competent and just like very good at what she does. And just to see those two things at the same time, I think felt very real. I also really, really love the love interest in this book, who I say every time I talk about this, I don't want to say his name because you don't find it out until very late in the book, and it's kind of a cool moment, so I'm not going to talk about his name, but I love him. I think like their relationship is kind of slow burn. It's like, I just really love it, and I think that it's one that could please people who like a lot of different kinds of romance tropes. It's just like very, very well developed, and I just love how much the two of them respect each other and admire each other. And yeah, it's just like, it's so satisfying to see him be just like in awe at how badass his girlfriend is. Like, I love that. And it is definitely mutual too. But I love them together, and the romance definitely doesn't take over the story because like they have bigger things to be worrying about right now, like saving their kingdom. But it is such a wonderfully developed subplot in this book. I really loved some of the supporting characters as well, and I also really like that this is a historical book that does talk about how like queer people also existed then. And I think that was done with a lot of care. This book also deals with ideas of like who writes down history, like who gets to control the narrative, and how like the very act of being a group who has a writing system gives you an advantage when you're telling the story of what happened, because those are the documents that survive. So this book deals with some ideas like that I found just really, really interesting. Also, I think this book does the like girl dresses up as boy trope in a way that felt believable and like actually engaged with like what that would mean in like a way that was not frustrating. That's a trope that I can be very, very picky about, and I think it was done very thoughtfully here. And also, like, this is gonna sound weird to say because obviously she's pretending to be a boy for like a significant part of the book, but it didn't like overpower every other element of the story, and I think that actually feels more realistic because it's like, yes, she's always worried that people are gonna find out her secret, but it's not like the only thing that's happening in this book, you know? And finally, one of my absolute favorite things about this book is that even though it is a girl dressing up as boy trope, and it is a girl who is very physically strong, and there are not many female characters for a big chunk of this book, even though all of those things are true, this book specifically and explicitly attacks the not like other girls idea. And I just love it. I love it so much. There's like a line where Mulan is like thinking to herself that she's not, basically that she's not only what she appears to be, like as a woman, and she thinks immediately after that, she's like, no woman is. And just like little things like that, where this book makes it very clear that there is not only one way to be a strong woman and to be an intelligent woman, and even if you are more traditionally feminine, that does not make you weak. And I just love it. More books need to take a cue from this one, because it is honestly so easy to do, like to have those little moments that make it clear that you're not like putting down other women. Yeah, I love that part of this book. Again, it makes me very sad this is so underhyped. I know it's like a very not niche story, but it's like not one that's going to work for everyone because it is so character focused. But even if some elements of it don't sound like your thing, it might still be worth giving a try, because again, I don't like journey books or military focused books, and I still loved this. And then finally, my number one favorite book that I read last year, which you already know if you saw the collab that I did with My Name is Marines and a bunch of other people. I will link that down below. So you might already know the answer, but Ray Bear by Jordan Afueko. I just adored this book. This is another one I think that got like a good amount of attention. I tend to hear that people like really good things about it, that most people have enjoyed this, and I wholeheartedly concur. This was just such a stellar fantasy book. So we follow our main character Tarsai, and she has grown up being trained by her mother to basically assassinate the prince of their empire or of their kingdom. But the tricky part about this is that even though Tarsai's mother has like raised her to be chosen as one of the prince's like advisors or something, like even though she's been trained for this, the catch kind of, or like what makes this very complicated from the beginning, is that because of the way that selection process works, you can only become one of the prince's advisors if you truly care about him. So by definition, this is going to be a very, very difficult personal conflict for Tarasai, because she has been like raised by her mother to kill this person who she must end up caring about in order to get close enough to him to do that. And this book, I don't even know how to talk about it, because like every section of this book, it just builds on itself, and it builds and it creates this wider and wider story. And I think that was done just flawlessly. Like every time I got to the end of the, like, I think this book is actually divided up into parts, and every time I got to the end of a part, I was like, oh, that was incredible. Like nothing can top that. I don't want to go to the next section, and then I'd get into that section and Jordan Fueko would win me over. Like, I just think this book is masterfully plotted. I think the world building is incredible and just so rich. I watched a panel that Jordan Fueko was on, and she was talking about how, like, she's like, never again am I going to write a fantasy world with 13 distinct, like cultural kingdom, like culturally different kingdoms, basically. And you can tell that she just put so much work and like care into those different kingdoms and giving them their own culture and history and background. And the way that these kingdoms interact with each other is also really well thought out. I adored Tarasai as a protagonist. I felt for her so much, and like being pulled in these different directions and like wanting to be her own person, and also trying to figure out, like, this is something I'm realizing that I just find very compelling in main characters, because The Golem and the Genie also does this, and it's one of my favorite books. But like, Tarasai is trying to figure out how much of herself is actually herself, like how much of her personality and her wishes and her abilities, and like just how much of her is her own, and how much is because of the way that her mother raised her, or like the things that her mother did to train her. Like, it's just, yeah, I loved Tarasai. I was so invested in her and in like finding out what was going to happen. There's also a romance element in this book that definitely does not take over the story, but I loved it. I loved the way it was developed, and I think in some ways it doesn't go the direction I think a lot of people might expect from this book, or like from this book's like story. And I just thought it was really well done. I really loved some of the friendships. As I've been saying, I think the plot is incredible, and the way that works into the world building and the way that works into the themes that this book talks about like things like empire. And yeah, I just like, this is truly one of the best fantasy books I have ever read. It is my favorite book of 2020. I loved it. I loved it so much. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Just kind of like trailing off into incoherent love. So this was, I'm sure, a very, very long video, but that was me gushing about my favorite books of 2020, specifically my favorite novels of 2020. I really, like, if you guys are still watching these, thank you so, so much. I know this is incredibly late, and yeah, it's just, last year, there was a period where like, things were happening and I did not feel like I was in the mood to film. I did not really feel like I could film or should, so that got me behind, and I'm obviously still catching up. So I apologize for the delay on so many things, but thank you for sticking with me, and please comment down below. Let me know if you also loved any of these books. Let me know if you're gonna pick any of them up now. Let me know what one of your favorite books was last year. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!